C'est un peu décidé, moi je sais
When Sandra told me about this exhibition, I was immediately kind of interested in it because there's many ways that blackout as a concept resonates with what I'm studying, which is irreversible noise. And some of these ways will be about unpredictability, okay, so the way that the blackout happens without prediction, about energy technologies and entropy, which I'm going to explain about a little bit, about information overload, for example, so when a blackout can happen because of too much power, for example, in one position, but then also, for example, we can have information overload like a Ganzfeld experiment. So a Ganzfeld experiment would be where somebody has just a single color given to them in a very wide field, so that after some time the color will just go away, so it's blacked out effectively, right? So there's this, and this is a kind of sensory deprivation at the same time as a sensory overload in some way, right? Also there'll be the opposite, which is a loss of consciousness. So where we have a total loss of information when we black out. Okay. Then censorship, of course. The blackout areas of text, which shouldn't be seen, the suppression of information, and then that relates to opacity in general, which is opacity is like the opposite of transparency. So what we can't see in the workings of capital and so on, for example. And then concealment. Concealment, I mean by this kind of camouflage, and this screen here at the back is an example of this, right? Which is so it relates to in the wartime when we need to black out the windows so that you don't attract bombs to that area. And this relates very strongly, to the idea of crypsis, which I'm going to talk about, and which will come up across a few things. So crypsis is an evolutionary biological term that relates to camouflage, and usually that camouflage will be in the form of randomness. Okay, so it's between predator and prey relationships, and the incorporation of randomness into those things. So I think this has got implications for philosophy, politics, economics, neurology, and aesthetics. For example, the use of noise in music and sound art. So, firstly, blackout is unpredictable. This is both an epistemological and an ontological question. So, I'm not sure how many people know about these terms, correlationist and non-correlationist. Effectively, a correlationist philosophy is one which makes being and thought in a relationship. So we can't think being, that's things, or the existence of things, ontology of things, without their relationship to thought. So obviously, for example, unpredictability will usually be understood in a correlationist way. So, what's unpredictable is unpredictable for a certain person or a certain information processing system. But also we can have a non-correlationist understanding of it, or an objective understanding of unpredictability using scientific concepts such as entropy or algorithmic complexity and other forms of complexity. So there's linear and there's randomness in linear and non-linear systems in classical physics. Okay, so for example, the double pendulum is one good example of this kind of randomness in classical physics, where a double pendulum is a pendulum with another pendulum attached. Okay, so a pendulum swings in this direction. If we have this second pendulum attached to it, then every time you start it from the same position, it will do a different sequence or pattern. Okay, and for example, the weather is a very common example of unpredictability through nonlinear processes. So there's what we don't want to do is to kind of just say it's all all the same, right? So this is all kind of randomness and noise and so on. There's a very strong specificity and multiplicity of randomness, noise, and complexity. Okay, so examples of this in randomness, you've got pseudo-randomness, quasi-randomness, and other measures of randomness. Then in noise, we have white noise, brown noise, blue noise, pink noise, black noise, and so on. There's many forms of noise. And in complexity, we have Kolmogorov complexity, which is a way of talking about algorithmic complexity, functional complexity, which is a biological way of talking about it, and many others. All okay so far? So yeah, this is a kind of schematic relationship between complexity and randomness here, and you can see, for example, on the left-hand side at the bottom with organized simplicity here, that you can use analytic tools to understand or to determine this kind of randomness. So, for example, Newtonian mechanics would work for this section, and then at the top of unorganized complexity, statistical methods can determine what's going on here. So if we think about the movement of molecules in a gas, this can be analysed statistically according to entropy, for example. But in this kind of organised complexity area, then we need multiple tools. So statistical, analytical, qualitative, and many different kinds. Okay, so this is why it's complex, because it can't be reduced to one single kind of understanding. We need to use many tools to do it, because there's a kind of superposition of things. Okay, so this would be the complexity. So then I would like to talk kind of about a kind of non-standard randomness, and this would be kind of a non-correlationist understanding of randomness, but also one that is not based on this kind of reversible opposition between randomness and order, as if randomness only exists when there's order to compare it to, but one where kind of we unilateralize it, which means we cut this and make randomness the dominant kind of concept, right? And the order only kind of comes out of randomness. So, I mean, one of the kind of the principal ways this is talked about, I mean, if we look at kind of naive discourses on randomness, they will often use Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and say, oh yes, because Heisenberg showed this, then we now know that everything is random and we can't talk about anything anymore. Right? But this is not the right way to think about it. Okay, and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is really the opposite. So what it says is that at the quantum level, randomness is purely determinate. Okay, so there is this very high degree of randomness in the movement of quantum particles, but they're determinate in terms of probabilities. Okay, so this phrase at the top, quantum mechanics as formal ontology, comes from Gabriel Catren, who explains very clearly how the quantum mechanics is able to give a mathematical description of physical objects that is complete. So it's not that there's some, that we don't have knowledge of this randomness that is the problem. Okay, that the randomness really exists in itself. Okay, so it's not about our inability to formulate the problem. But it's a deterministic understanding of randomness, but there's a computational cost to determining that randomness. Okay, so we can't have a quantum mechanical description of every item in this room, for example, because it's too much to compute, right? And in the whole universe, even more, obviously. And the same at the classical level, right? So, we can have we can determine classical randomness to some extent, but then it's also going to cost in terms of energy and computational power. Right? So where you really get kind of this indeterministic randomness is in biological contingency. So this is truly incomputable in some way. And the way to explain this will be to look at the geodesic principle. So the geodesic principle applies to inert matter, okay, so non-biological matter, which basically it argues that inert matter will follow the gravitational field in a way that is like a computation. So, for example, if you roll a ball down a hill, it will compute the easiest path down the hill. So it's always optimal, the movement of that particle, and this is true of all inert matter interactions in some way. But biological life is non-optimal. Okay, so it's the way that it functions is by a variability and by a noise, effectively, right? So and the way we can explain this is by a term called anti-entropy, which is different from neg-entropy, as I'll talk about later. So this kind of non-optimal search space that biological evolution follows means that there's this continuous production of noise in life, in living matter, and that scales up right to kind of social levels of interaction, for example. So that means that biological life is non-computational and non-algorithmic. Now this doesn't mean, I'm against this kind of very simple rejection of algorithmics, right? So I think that we shouldn't just kind of say, oh, they're bad because they're in finance and they kind of objectify us and so on, for example, right? We do very interesting work with algorithmics in music, for example, and if we take any biological process that we've recorded, we can make an algorithm that will do the same thing. Okay, but what we can't do is make an algorithm that will create this kind of real biological contingency in a way that's not computational. Okay, because the algorithm is computational. And the important thing with this, also with the geodesic principle, for example, is that although we can describe this ball rolling down a hill as a computation, it's only a computation because we take it to be one, effectively. So, a computation, really we can understand it as being the specification of a value as input and the recording of the value as output. So if we haven't specified the value as input or taken a value as output, then it's not a computation, really. Okay, it's just something happening in the world. Effectively, this means that computation has to be correlational in some way, right? That there would have to be an observer or some kind of information processing system engaged in computation. So one of the things that comes out of this is that we can say that inert matter can be understood as formed of generic objects. So, for example, atoms, molecules, and so on, and what they consider, the protons and neutrons and electrons. These are all generic objects, which are the same across every hydrogen atom is the same, effectively, but they have specific trajectories which are hard to compute. Living matter, on the other hand, is a specific object with a generic trajectory. So obviously the generic trajectories are again difficult to compute because of the social system. But if we take them as a whole, for example, well, we know every living object is going to be sleeping, eating, shitting, dying in the end, for example. So these are the kind of generic trajectories of living matter.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Could you illustrate how to determine a randomness in the classical physics?
How to determine randomness in classical physics? Yeah, well, there's various methods depending on the kind of on the subject matter. But say, for example, if we take the way that a liquid one liquid, if we put it into a different liquid, how it mixes, then we can make for example, a diffusion equation that tells us the random movements of how that will disperse over the rest of the liquid. So that's one kind of method, and there'll be different ones, but basically they'll be based on diffusion equations mostly, for example. Anything else? Okay, so this is about predictive tech. Predictive text is a bit like a predictive text. Oh, stupid joke. Anyway, technical evolution has led to a progressive increase in cybernetic mechanisms directed towards the future, and so this is related very much to the calculating of unpredictability, and this calculation of unpredictability has massively increased in our modern society, right? In the cybernetic world that we live in, and for example, in finance, this is a very big thing. So in finance, they'll be based on the probabilistic quantification of noise, or a measure of randomness applied to a database of past performance statistics and corrected according to negative feedback, which is the cybernetic control mechanism. Okay, so in finance, for example, a lot of models will be based on Brownian noise, which is the way that molecules randomly interact with each other. But then we can also apply, for example, different forms of noise to that prediction with different results. So there's this evolutionary kind of development of financial technologies on the basis of this. Okay, so these financial technologies are performing negentropy, right, which is the kind of reduction of the damage that noise will cause to an ordered system, let's say.
I don't know if it's useful for others, but maybe to go back to the difference between anti-entropy
and negentropy, yeah. So basically, negentropy will try to is the way that an information processing system will try to reduce the level of disruption to the organisation of the system. So it needs the information processing system wants to keep in a coherent structure, to stay itself, and and to maintain its proper functioning. And it can do this by various control mechanisms, and that will reduce the damage, but it can't reduce it up to 100%. So there's always a certain amount of noise damage to any negentropic functioning machine. But anti-entropy it doesn't have a zero. So if we add negentropy to entropy, it will come up to zero at the 100% efficiency. Mm-hmm. But if we add anti-entropy to entropy, then it's got a positive value. So it's not that's the difference. That's the key difference. So for example, we have futures markets and high frequency trading, all part of this kind of what I see as a kind of irreversible trajectory towards complexity, and we can see this this kind of highly competitive evolutionary system proliferating different mechanisms for anticipation of the future. Each system trying to get quicker and better results than those other ones that it's competing with. So there's so this kind of system is highly complex because of the high diversity of the systems. So diversity of technical financial instruments is huge, and really expanded recently. And then this high interconnectedness between those systems. At the same time, there's also a high degree of opacity in the functioning of those networks. So the way that, for example, toxic debts were passed around in packages that were, people could buy them without knowing what's inside those packages, right? And so there'll be a constant buying and selling of these things, which nobody knew what they were, for example.
Yeah, but they're based on human decisions. They're not random factors. Like
That's right.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of psychological aspect to it. It's
Totally. Yeah.
a lot of human will.
I think
It's
so.
not
Yeah.
It's just like it's not pure mechanics.
No, that's right. And I mean, as I said before, the kind of there's a distinction, right, between this kind of between the determinate randomness of inert matter, and then this kind of indeterminate randomness that comes from the fact that there's biological things interacting with it, right, which also have kind of neurobiological kind of capacities as well. There's opacity. Then there's also crypsis here as well. So which is the way that, for example, if we take one of the most common examples, say, would be the. So if you're going to do a trade in a futures market, generally you don't want people to know that you're buying this much of this product, right? Because then people can react to that knowledge and undercut you or buy it for you, or the price is going to go up and this kind of thing. So it's about the effect that your action is going to have on the ecology of finance. So what's done in every trade now is that you algorithmically spread that trade. So using noise to make it look like nothing's happened. And so you spread your trade across. And this is just a camouflage mechanism. Okay. And so this, for me, relates to the thermodynamics of capitalist accumulation. So capitalist accumulation, it needs to continually increase, but it's increasing on the basis of the material energetic relations in the world, and how much value can be extracted from these relations it's constantly diminishing to some degree, right? Because if you take value in one way, then other people will realize that value can be taken in this way, and soon that ability to take value will be saturated. And so you've got to look for a new form of taking value. And this is why we get this this disconnection in the 70s between finance and the gold standard, right? Because it enables capital to carry on. There's a whole new field which we can open up to the extraction of value that wasn't there before. So this is a very dangerous system, a very dangerous situation, as we all know, with the recent financial crisis, and it's related to the structural coupling of different systems. A structural coupling where two systems are connected to the degree that they will affect each other in very strongly between what happens, and so then. In the situation of high frequency trading, we get a high degree of structural coupling and a very high vulnerability to risk because of that. Okay. At the same time, that risk is outsourced through hedging strategies, for example. So, is there the same word in France?
Hedge funds?
Hedge funds, exactly, right. So this is it, and hedging really is, it started as a mode of insurance. So it's, for farmers who would try to kind of to prevent themselves from being destroyed by fluctuations in the prices of goods, and also
the weather.
From the weather and so on. So the possibility of a bad harvest. But then now this kind of mechanism has expanded hugely, and it's done for speculative reasons. So this effectively what this does is it socializes debt. So big financial corporations are able to insure themselves by passing on the risk to other objects, and essentially to us. Especially in the bailout of the banks and so on. And one of the ideas that relates to this unpredictability of the blackout and this situation of the thermodynamics of finance is the concept of the black swan, which was developed by Nassim Taleb. So he wrote a book about this, and so the black swan basically refers to originally, when the phrase came out, there were no black swans. So in England at that time, there were just white swans. When they went to Australia, they found black swans, and so this was a completely unpredictable event. So when people used to say, "Oh, like a black swan," that's something that never happens, right? But then when they found the black swans, they're like, "Oh, so they do." Right. Okay, so the black swan is this kind of completely unpredictable event that can have vast effects on people. Okay? And so Taleb argues that because of this high structural coupling, and because of the way that finance has got a very high degree of information, quick information sharing, then something like a black swan will immediately affect all of the systems very quickly and cause a propagation of risk throughout those things. So he also argues that when you have information-based networks, then there's a different distribution of randomness and risk than there was in previous forms. Okay, so he shows that, for example, if we look at the height of people, then there's a Gaussian probability distribution, which means we get a smooth kind of curve like this, and the tallest person is only going to be a little bit taller than the shortest person. Okay, so, but then with a fractal distribution, we have it's scalable. So the biggest operator, Google, for example, is a scale above the next big operator and they're a scale a bit above the next biggest one. And and for example, with like best-selling novels as well, the author who gets the bestseller is just huge compared to those who don't, right? So this is the kind of winner takes all scenario as it goes. And then there's Ilya Ash has developed an idea of the blank swan, which goes a bit further than Taleb by saying, because Taleb's really still he's saying we can't predict these events, and so they're totally improbable, but then we have to kind of know what to do about it, and we have to hedge our bets. Ayash is saying, no, we have to go beyond probability. Now we're in a situation where probability isn't the case anymore. We need to. What's happening in the markets is that market makers they decide the market effectively. They performatively produce the effects of the market to some degree. Okay, so it's not about kind of models of probability, but it's more about kind of the way that probabilities can be altered by behavior. We all okay now? Okay, so the truth of extinction. Here we get to the kind of entropic thermodynamics. So thermodynamics is kind of the history of it comes from the development of steam power, and the Carnot cycle is so Carnot is a French theorist who he was trying to look at the way that basically he was studying the basis of English power, which was steam power, and why they were kind of had a military kind of advantage over French at that time. And what he found was that it was impossible to create a 100% efficient engine, as we've said before. Okay, so this is the basis of entropy and the second law of thermodynamics. So there's a kind of a leaky nature of thermal energy. So it is always going to be some thermal energy that escapes. And this is the same for sonic energy as well. So, I mean, even if we don't move, we're producing heat. And as soon as we move, we produce sound, noise. Any action produces both heat and sound, noise. And this has biological implications, of course. I mean, we have hair to stop the heat escaping, but then also kind of cats have paws to stop the sound of their going for prey, and this is obviously related to crypsis again. Okay, so the way that we kind of camouflage our behaviour and so on, I mean, one of my favourite examples of this actually is bats and moths. Okay, so moths. There are some moths. Moth is a kind of butterfly that flies in the night. Yeah. So some moths have a high degree of hair on their body, which is not for thermal reasons, but to dampen the sound that bats create. So when bats make this sonar, it hits the moth and tells the bat where it is. But if they have this dampening effect on their body, the sound just gets absorbed and the bat can't see it. At the same time, the moth makes a sound itself, so that it sounds like it's coming from over there. Very clever. Okay, so effectively, all life is this kind of exchange from low to high entropy. So with thermal loss, and we can describe this, the ratio of low to high entropy as throughput. Okay, so throughput is how much low entropy you're able to process and how much high entropy you produce as a result of it. Okay, so I mean, just a very simple example would be like, an apple is a source of low entropy, and we eat it and it creates high entropy in the form of heat and feces, right? There's obviously different levels of efficiency in different foods, for example. Now, the capitalist economy, if we look back on the last kind of 500 years or however long in history, we can see this kind of increase in throughput. So throughput is just increasing. The amount of energy waste and waste matter is increasing all the time. And I think this is the most important point for me, is that it's not just the second law of thermodynamics, which is what this states, but also the fourth law of thermodynamics, which Georgescu Rogan, as a Romanian economist, suggested, which is that it's not just energy which follows this entropic path, but matter. When we're talking about a civilization, right? Because we're it's about how much matter there is in a state of low entropy that is available, and this is highly important for our situation today. For example, with things like rare earth elements, okay, which are the very, very small amounts are used in computers and mobile phones and so on, but they're very scarce, and the supplies that we have got of those in low entropy kind of packages, okay, so we can say, there's some of that material, we can take it. We've used a lot of this, and the rest of it is very spread out, so it's in a high entropy state, very difficult to extract. This is the meaning of high entropy, is that it's energy that's difficult to extract, and this is why heat energy is the most entropic, because it can't be used so easily. It's so dispersed. There's distinctions. So free available energy and bound energy is another way of talking about it. If it's bound energy, then it's very difficult to extract it. Now, some of you may have heard about Maxwell's demon. I'm sure you know about this thing. Okay, so Maxwell's demon was a thought experiment from a long time ago, before even entropy was properly theorized, and it was the idea that if you have two boxes of air, then a demon at the top could open a door and close a door when he saw a hot molecule coming. He could open the door, and a cold molecule coming, he could open the door the other way. This means that eventually he should get a box full of hot molecules on this side and a box full of cold molecules on the other side. So this is this thought experiment kind of is supposed to prove the idea of neg-entropy. Okay, so the way that you can go against entropy and really move a system from being disordered into ordered, right? But Maxwell's demon has been disproved. There's a solution to it, right? And the solution is the energetic cost of forgetting. Okay, so if the demon is able to open the door because he knows he can see a hot molecule there, and he knows its position, he can pull up the door. But if he's got that information in his brain, then he's got to get rid of it to get to look at the next molecule. and this causes heat energy to lose, right? So unfortunately, we're still in the entropic situation. And so we can describe this also in terms of observer relative entropy and observer independent entropy. Okay, so and what's very interesting is that this observer relative entropy relates to the evolution of a function, and we can more broadly say that a function would encompass technology as well. So I mean, but also, for example, any behaviour like swimming for a fish, right? So basically, it runs like this: we can understand the evolutionary selection of a function, say swimming, as following the maximum entropy principle, which states that, you know, for all of those micro behavioral possibilities that don't produce the desired function in an efficient way, or a way that's cost efficient in terms of energy, then those will be the entropy of those states will be maximized. This means that they become effectively noise to the system. So this is a way of understanding how a function develops in this very kind of efficient way of evolutionary development. So, you know, if we think about the way a kangaroo moves, it's got this highly efficient mechanism. It loses very little energy. So it's kind of, you know, almost at this kind of zero loss of heat energy. But it and really the way that has happened is all of those kind of states which were nearly like that but not like that were kind of became noise to the system. Okay, so this works through entropy, and then we can understand this kind of just this on its own, this observer relative entropy, as being, you know, negentropic, right? Because it's decreasing the amount of energy expenditure for the system. Okay. However, that observer relative entropy occurs within an observer independent entropy system. Okay, so there will still be more entropy in the world as a result of that. Okay, so the way that negentropy works is by offloading entropy onto the environment. Okay, so instead of suffering the entropy as a system yourself, you develop better and better ways to push the entropy outside the system. And so we can see that the way that we've, in civilization, we've done this massive kind of negentropic kind of production of technological civilization. It seems to be more and more efficient, but for us, right, the environment gets all the rest of the entropy, right? And also another way of talking about this kind of increase in entropy, which is observer independent and the observer relative one. So it is, for example, we might say, oh, but what about coal energy? We used to use coal energy, and that created a lot of pollution. And then we moved to kind of to oil-based economy and electricity, which is much less polluting and more efficient. Yes, this is true on an observer relative scale, but with Jevons paradox, what happens is that if you find a more efficient way to get energy from the environment, your energy use does not drop; it carries on going in the same direction, because you just use the extra energy to do something else, and to continue exploiting the environment. Okay, so it's not that finding new forms of more efficient energy use it kind of leads to a more sustainable existence. Not necessarily. Are you okay? Any questions?
And the Jevons paradox, is that a physical law or is like a human assumption?
It's a general. I mean, I think neither really. It's just a kind of it's what generally happens generically in biological systems. So even if an animal can get energy more efficiently, then it will generally use that extra energy to do something else rather than drop its use of that energy resource. And the same for humans, obviously.
On crypsis, you described it as being the predator-prey relationship, and then you mentioned the bat and the moth.
Yeah.
But the example you evoked was it a market in which the predator and prey relationship is constantly in flux?
Yeah. But then you still have this predator-prey relationship. Yeah. So I mean, traders will be both predator and prey at the same time, effectively. Mm-hmm. But they, as a buyer, when they act in a predator form, then they're using crypsis in a predator way, and when they act in a prey form, they're using crypsis in a prey form. So, I mean, we get this constant. It's an arms race between these things, which I'll talk about in a second. So, as Sandra mentioned in the start, I've written an article about this, which is on Mute magazine, about the idea of computing civil disobedience. So, civil disobedience, the eruption of social unrest, is another kind of unpredictable effect, and highly related to the kind of thermodynamics of capital, for example, and the way that for example, you get food price spikes, and they can be correlated to the outbreak of riots, there's a kind of a very low accuracy for forecasting specifics of those kind of unrest. So, for example, the time and the place that they're going to happen and what happens in the unrest. But then crowd movement itself is highly susceptible to probabilization because of the statistical addition of generic trajectories. So this means that computational modeling can show what's likely to happen in the movement of a crowd, in a certain area, and so on. And police use these systems, and they're very aware of how we can manipulate the movement of crowds through this computational modeling of their generic behavior. So computational modeling is used by the forces of order and by the right wing, but generally it's rejected by the left and by humanities kind of discourse because of the problems that we have with it. Because computational modeling reduces us to units and kind of objectifies us and this kind of thing. Yes, but we shouldn't reject it because of this, right? It's also very interesting when we apply it to evolutionary concerns. So there's evolutionary game theory, for example, and in general, kind of the bad reception of game theory has been through its misuse. For example, during the Cold War, and also in the way that public laws are made on the basis of it. Right? So, in general, it's been because of the reliance on a single model, really, and a very kind of didactic, kind of heavily kind of functional use of that model. So, which is based on the prisoner dilemma game. The prisoner dilemma game, if you don't know it, is the idea that there's two prisoners in different rooms, and they have to decide whether they're going to give information about the other person and get free, or to say nothing and get the same sentence as that person. Is a basic idea. Now, the prisoner's dilemma game works because those prisoners don't have communication. And if you look at any kind of real world situation, mostly people can communicate with each other. Okay, so the prisoner's dilemma game is used to argue that any kind of shared resource, which is what we call a common pool resource problem, will tend towards the tragedy of the commons, right? Where because anybody can freely use the resource, then the resource will tend to be used completely, by everyone and exhausted instead of maintained. Now, this doesn't happen in most real life situations. I mean, sometimes it does, but if we look at the long history of human use of common pool resources, most of the time there'll be effective communication and coordination and collective decisions about the use of those common resources. So, Eleanor Ostrom argues that this is really what needs to happen is that there's collective decisions on the basis of those common pool resource problems, and the creation of institutions which will be able to monitor and effectively control those common pool resources. And by institutions, we don't mean kind of state or corporate institutions, but just kind of collective kind of groups of people, say, right? I don't know why I've got... Oh yeah, because this is related to evolutionary game theory. So I've talked about crypsis a bit already, and when I was talking about this kind of arms race between predator and prey, this is called the Red Queen effect, and the Red Queen effect is it comes from Lewis Carroll's book Alice in Wonderland. Yeah, so it's basically the idea of moving to stay still. So the Red Queen's moving in order to stay still, and this is what's happening in this kind of cryptic race between predator and prey. There's this
Cold War.
Yeah, exactly, a Cold War situation where they're continually kind of increasing their defences, and there's this kind of propagation of effects, the kind of runaway line of evolution, and you can see this in kind of all kinds of lots of biological examples, and some get to the point that they're negative. Okay, so the famous example will be a kind of stick insect, a kind of insect that looks like a tree, like this, and very thin. And it became to look so much like its food that other members of its species started to eat it. So yeah, this kind of war game can go in the wrong direction. But the end of this result is that there's a power of modelling, and so the power of modelling is to make explicit the implicit rules of a game. So whether we like it or not, we're involved in a game. If a game is a weird word to use for it, but because it's not funny, the game, but in general, the rules of the game are implicit. We don't know what they are, and and people are just acting on the basis of this lack of communication. And what we need to do is to make those rules explicit by modelling them, and then we are able to change the parameters of the game. Okay, so another little kind of jump here in some way, but then the link here is about the heterogeneity of models. So as I was saying before with the idea of modelling, the important thing is that there isn't one game which explains all of the models. We need to develop diverse examples of games, and we need to model in diverse different ways. And I think that this can be applied to academic kind of and other kind of forms of practices such as art. Right, so there's a heterogeneity of models and a specificity or relative autonomy of disciplines. This means that art models the world in the same way as science does, or kind of or physics does. But it's in a different way, in a way that is distinctive to art, and that shouldn't be on a different level than other disciplines. So this is a kind of epistemological flattening, the way that kind of all forms of acting in the world have an equal access to knowledge production, say. So the argument is that from an aesthetic point of view, we can understand the artwork as irreducible to didactic, classic or romantic regimes of interpretation. That doesn't mean that we can't explain them according to those modes of interpretation, but that can't be the only explanation of it. Those are ways of modelling the artwork, but which don't exhaust the artwork. Neither can we reduce them to mimetic, representative, or sublime kind of understandings, and it's not restricted to affect and percept, which would be the Deleuzian explanation of art. And again, here to have this explanation of the artist as creating a chaosmosis, where here's a kind of fulcrum between chaos and order. So it's the artist kind of distributes the relations between chaos and order, and this I find is a reversible kind of relationship, which I think we need to flatten according to this epistemological flattening, and to kind of understand in a different way. So I would argue that it's following the identity of theory and practice in radical immanence as a performative model that's ethically enacted. Okay, so it means that the practice, any art practice is also a theory about the world. Okay, and any theory about the world has got practical, material reality to it also. Okay, and that reality is always performative. It's about kind of what I want to do in the world, how I want to affect the world, and that's an ethical consideration. So, nearly finished. There's an increasing cultural complexity in the accumulation of signs, which is kind of related to this idea of fractal aesthetics, right? There's a kind of fractal kind of proliferation of forms, right? I mean, the quantity of knowledge resources that we have now is obviously bigger than it ever was before, and also when I say knowledge resources, I don't just mean kind of science and so on. I'm talking about art and music and so on and so forth. Right? So there's a massive accumulation of science, and this is both on the in terms of form and content. Okay, so with form, you've got a micro proliferation of genres in music, and in terms of content as well. So in music again, there's the rise of timbre in kind of 20th century classical music, and kind of more popular forms, and there's a focus on the materiality of the work and the composition in music, and this introduction of noise very frequently into the artwork. So, I got two more. Okay, so this is another project that I'm kind of working on, which is the subsumption of sociality. And let me just explain that quickly for those who don't know. So formal and real subsumption come from Marx's definition. So formal subsumption is the way in which capital extracts value from already existing labour relations. So there's people farming, growing crops, and capital comes along and says, we own this land, we want you to pay rent for the use of that, and so on. So this is to be the first way in which capital kind of extracts value from the system. Then the real subsumption, the stage, is when capital reorganises those relationships in order to extract more value. And this happens in the Industrial Revolution, for example, when people are put into factories and made to work according to kind of schematized labour patterns. And there's a stage of subsumption happening now, which is related to sociality, to communication, and that's mostly kind of occurring under things like social networks and so on. This is, often it's seen as kind of. Often social networks are seen as kind of this liberating possibility to communicate and so on. Also, I mean, there's the whole idea of free labour, which most of you probably have heard about now. So it's coming to notice about this. But nevertheless, it's often understood as just this kind of, since it's just information and kind of immaterial, as it were, then it's nothing really to worry about. But there's energetic costs to big data, and going back to thermodynamic of capital, there's something like a third of. I'm not good on the figures here, but a large amount of energy is used for these big data centers. So if you look at the Facebook's and Google's huge warehouses where they house and store and process data, there's a huge amount of heat energy which is let out into the atmosphere, and they're using. I mean. Facebook, for example, are supposed to be carbon neutral. At the same, and they do this by offsetting their carbon use by buying up jungle, for example, and so on, and planting trees. But at the same time, they're producing this massive amount of high entropy into the world, and so it's not as if information is immune from the production of entropy, right? Also, this kind of encourages or brings in what we're part of now, which is an attention economy. So there's demands on our attention continually, and advertisers will pay to get your attention, and this is how kind of these big data processors are able to sustain themselves by selling that to advertisers and marketing data collectors. But at the same time, this 24-hour free labor that we give to these things, is itself has got this energetic cost, right? Because we need to eat and so on in order to spend time on Facebook. So there's a material reality to this. And so crowdsourcing, kind of cognitive labour, has got a vast impact on our lives, and I'm sure I don't need to explain this to you because you'll experience it directly every day. So cultural knowledge resources are expanding, but at the same time, time or attention resources are contracting. The last one, noise power. So this is why I would say we need collective strategies for information sharing that are independent from state and capital control. There was one, Sandra, you had this video, Metahaven video. Jonas.
Both.
Yes,
Hi. Yeah, I mean, this for me is an example of this kind of thing, and you know, there's other.
Jonas, can you say 3 words?
Yes, unexpectedly. So, together with Metahaven and Design Collective, we worked on a we worked together with the Green Party, who proposed in the Netherlands a new freedom of information law, meaning that all documents from in a few years on that are produced by government that have any impact on have any collective importance have to be made public in a digital database. And this has happened in a few different countries as well. You think of Norway, and at this moment in Iceland. There's some important reforms happening, but the problem is that the government produces the software themselves. So it still becomes very difficult, or there's still a lot of exclusions into getting to the information you want. So what we've developed is a kind of crossover between the logic of WikiLeaks and the logic of social media, meaning that there's a big collective database where continuously all government information is placed in, but then through social media devices it's possible to share, comment, and have circulated this information in different types of ways. So very practically, if you're a citizen, you subscribe to Nullpunt, which is the name of the application. You say, I'm interested in cultural affairs, foreign affairs, etc. All documents related to that, through that law, are forced to come into your private database. There you can comment, share, but also follow other users, and that way you build upon a kind of active civilian force that's capable of dealing with information that now only journalists or politicians have the privilege to do and have the tools to do. This is very compactly done.
It's excellent, and you know, this is exactly the kind of thing I'm in. And you know, we talked in a Matter of Contradiction conference, you know, workshop that we did together about this a lot, about modes of instituting, and we gave, you know, we found a few different examples in arts and other practices that are trying to do this kind of thing. And I think it's really the way forward. But I mean, so what I would say though is that okay, we can't go just towards sustainable development. This is kind of in you know, if we're coming back to the idea of thermodynamics of capital, you know, because the idea of sustainable development is how to keep capital alive for longer. Right, so this is what we call, you know, what we call the necrocratic regime of capital. So capital is going to die with us, you know, at some point, you know. But you know, the sustainable development is like capital organising death in its way, right? So it wants us all to die together in a nice kind of easy way like this. But no, what we need is to fight this kind of thing. We need sustainable degrowth at the same time as accelerated development and at the same time as democratization of hedging. That means, you know, instead of the rich insuring themselves by outsourcing their risk to us, it's the other way around, right? So we insure ourselves, but you know, by new technologies. We need to invent these technologies, and you know, I mean, it's kind of ways of, you know, a behaviour as a technology for me as well, right? And again, kind of, you know, geoengineering, you know, we've got these terrible problems on the earth. Well, they're going to happen anyway, right? Because, you know, we've already put so much carbon dioxide into the world, and the sea levels are rising and they're becoming acidified. So effectively, we're forced into the situation, if we want to live on this planet, of geoengineering, right? But there's massive problems with geoengineering, and, you know, most of that is the unpredictable non-linearities of affecting such a highly balanced ecosystem. So, you know, this is kind of dodgy and have to be, you know, it would have to be done very, very carefully. On the other hand, what we can do is harness, I mean, kind of use for ourselves, capture big data and use it to accelerate to a post-capitalist utopia. we need to, and perhaps this means expanding our resource base. For example, not being restricted to the Earth. Which implies a kind of cosmist future. Going and habiting other planets, for example, terraforming and so on. So, but also kind of the possibilities of this kind of post-capitalist utopia would be kind of a universal access to free energy. If we can properly design, and obviously this would not go beyond the thermodynamic limits, but if we can exploit resources that are much wider than the ones we have before, then there's that possibility, and that would be like the end of if we have free energy, what's the need to buy stuff? And again, also the indefinite extension of anti-entropy, which would be effectively the end of death, albeit within contingency. Right? So we can't stop, for example, the universe imploding because it hits another universe. For example, I don't know. We don't know these things yet. But yeah, noise power. That's the end.